Hi everybody, welcome back aboard Profiles from the Titanic. Good to be with you once again. And I want to send a special thank you out there to all the new subscribers and those people who were commenting on the channel. And I do listen to them, I do read them. And this very profile is the result. More than anybody else, the name that came up that you wanted me to do the profile about was the senior Marconi wireless operator, Jack Phillips. And it is a fantastic story, and I have to tell you, so you sit and think about all the people on board. If you had to nominate one person who perhaps was the most important or influential, had the greatest impact on everything that happened, not only at that point, but even to this very day, the one person that I would nominate would be Jack Phillips. And now, why is that? Well, when you think about it, I want you to wrap your mind around this as we get into this profile and the role that Jack Phillips played. If there were no wireless aboard, right? No radio, no Marconi, as it had been prior, just a few short years prior to that, this technology was still in its infancy. But if there were no wireless set aboard, think about this. We wouldn't know what happened to the Titanic. We wouldn't know where, when it happened. And even to this very day, we wouldn't probably have found the Titanic because we wouldn't even know where it was in the North Atlantic Ocean. So when you think about that, everything that has transpired since that night in 1912 transpired. We know about it because from the survivors being picked up, that's how we know most of everything, the story about this. The survivors who were picked up from the boats by the Carpathia, they told their stories, and we know all about it, at least from their point of view. And because of the coordinates and everything else that went on about that, that allowed Dr. Ballard to find the wreck of the Titanic in 1985. And this is a very important date here. I'm posting this up on September 1st. And of course, most of you in the Titanic community know that this was the anniversary. This is the date, 36 years ago today, September 1st, was when Dr. Ballard found the Titanic. So it's a momentous day, and I wanted to try to get this up here on September 1st, so I hope you do enjoy that. But the other thing, the other aspect about Jack Phillips and his importance is, we know all that, and why do we know that? Well, because of the survivors, primarily. It started there. Think about it. He doesn't send those messages, the Carpathia doesn't come, and you got a couple of things here. Number one, I truly believe that if there were no radio messages sent, I don't think any single person survives. Because think about this. You have 700 plus people, mostly women and children on the lifeboats. They're out there in the freezing North Atlantic, and no one would even know about it. No one would even be coming to their rescue. Maybe you would have one boat picked up, sighted by a steamer or something, and that is lucky if you did. But I'm thinking that, most of those people, as they started succumbing to the elements and exposure, no food and water, most boats didn't have any adequate food and water, they would have probably wished that they would have gone down on the first night. I mean, think about that. How terrible would that have been? And we would not have even known about it, that it was happening. So that's the importance of Jack Phillips, and that he stayed to do his duty in the Marconi wireless room that night, along with his assistant, Harold Bride. And thank goodness Harold Bride survived. And everything that we know about Jack Phillips, it comes from Harold Bride. And again, because he survived when the Carpathia managed to come, because Jack Phillips sent the radio message. So he's my guy. I think he is. He's the most important person on board the Titanic. But anyway, enough of me yapping about it. Hit the subscribe and the like button, and I hope you enjoy this one. It's a great story, and thanks for watching Profiles from the Titanic. Senior Marconi wireless operator, Jack Phillips. John George Phillips was born in 1887 in Farncombe, Surrey, England. He began his working life at the Godalming Post Office, where he learned telegraphy. He then went to work for the Marconi Company and graduated as a wireless operator in 1906. He was assigned to the White Star Line and served aboard several ships over the following 2 years. In 1908, he was stationed on shore in Ireland before returning to the sea in 1911. In March of 1912, Phillips was made chief telegraphist and was assigned to the new ship, the RMS Titanic, along with junior operator Harold Bride. The wireless equipment on board the Titanic, a 5-kilowatt generator with rotary spark gap, was the most modern and powerful of any merchant ship then afloat. It had a range of up to 500 miles during the day, and at night in favorable conditions, the signal could reach up to 1,500 miles. During the days prior to the voyage, Phillips and Bride worked at getting the equipment up and running by performing tests to ensure everything was working properly. Since they were not technically employees of the White Star Line and not a part of the ship's crew, they often went ashore and enjoyed themselves by making short sightseeing trips. Once aboard, they divided their duties by Phillips taking the 8 to 2 shifts and Bride working the 2 to 8 shifts. They decided to split their days at each other's convenience when necessary. The day after the maiden voyage began, Phillips celebrated his 25th birthday on board. For the first days of the voyage, Phillips and Bride worked the wireless, sending messages from the passengers to the mainland. They were kept very busy performing this duty. On Saturday night at about 11 p.m., Phillips began having trouble with the wireless set. He awakened Harold Bride, and the two began to effect repairs to the equipment. After toiling until almost 5 a.m., they got the set working perfectly again, but neither had slept, and they had a massive backlog of messages to send, which would keep them even more busy all day Sunday. By Sunday evening, Phillips was exhausted, and Harold Bride offered to relieve him at midnight instead of waiting until 2 a.m. During the day, the wireless operators continued receiving messages from ships ahead of them, claiming that a region of flat ice, growlers, and icebergs lay in their path. All messages were supposed to be written down, logged in the radio book, and passed to the officers on the bridge. However, there is some controversy about the last several ice messages getting to the captain. Perhaps the most notable was the message that came from the ship Mesaba at 9:52 p.m., just shy of 2 hours before the fateful collision. The message stated that there was a large field of heavy pack ice with a great number of icebergs directly ahead of the Titanic. This message never reached the bridge because the exhausted Phillips was frantically sending his backlog of personal messages to Cape Race, the receiving station in Newfoundland, Canada. At 11:07 p.m., the final ice warning was received by Jack Phillips. This one was an informal message by the Leland steamer Californian, telling the Titanic that they were stopped for the night surrounded by ice. Because of the proximity of the ship, the message came in very loudly into Phillips' headset. Phillips responded, "Shut up, I'm working Cape Race." This ice message also was not sent to the bridge. The brush-off by Phillips caused by the wireless operator, the Californian Cyril Evans, to turn off his set for the night, and because it was late, went to bed shortly before 11:40 p.m. It was at this time that the Titanic struck the iceberg. All of this was unbeknownst to Phillips and Bride, however, and at midnight, Harold Bride took over sending messages and giving Jack Phillips a much-needed rest. He had been up for almost 30 hours. But his rest period would be drastically cut short. At approximately 12:20 or so, ship designer Thomas Andrews and Captain Smith were having a dire conversation where Andrews told the captain that the ship only had about an hour to an hour and a half to live. Captain Smith immediately ordered the evacuation to the lifeboats and then came and told Bride and Phillips to call for assistance by using the distress call, CQD. There was no explanation. The captain left as quickly as he had shown up. Jack Phillips immediately took the key from Bride, and at 12:27 a.m., the first distress signals were sent out from the Titanic. 10 minutes later, Phillips sent out an updated position for the ship and received word from the Carpathia that she was steaming toward them at full speed. Captain Smith returned, and when told of the Carpathia's distance, some 58 miles away, he deduced that it would be at least 4 hours until she arrived. Way too late to save everyone. Just before 1 a.m., Harold Bride suggested switching to the newer distress sign SOS, and even quipped that it might be the last time they would get to use it. Phillips began sending the SOS at that time. Working frantically for the next hour, at about 1:50 a.m., Captain Smith returned and told them the dire news. It was at this time that Phillips went out onto the deck to have a look around. He came back and told Bride to get dressed and get out the life belts. Phillips continued sending out signals, seemingly unconcerned for himself or their predicament. But he was noticing that the power was fading on board, and he would not be able to transmit very much longer. Captain Smith returned quickly and, at that point, released the men from their duty, saying they had done their best and to take care of themselves. It was the last time he spoke to them. Phillips continued working. It was now 2:02 a.m., just 18 minutes before Titanic's final plunge. One final controversy occurred right after Captain Smith left. As Bride was finishing getting dressed, he saw a stoker, a crewman who worked down in the boiler rooms, come in and literally try to take Jack Phillips' life belt off of him. Phillips was still working the key and didn't hardly notice what was happening. Bride came out of the cabin and hit the stoker, knocking him out cold. At that, both men decided to abandon the Marconi radio room. Harold Bride said that there was chaos on the decks with people running every which way. He saw Second Officer Lightaller on the officer's roof struggling with the collapsible boat, so he decided to help him. Jack Phillips ran to the aft section of the ship, and that was the last time Bride ever saw him. Jack Phillips perished in the sinking. He was 25 years old. His body was never recovered. Harold Bride, who did survive, said later that Phillips was a brave man, that he felt great reverence to see him standing there, sticking to his work while everybody was raging about. Bride would never forget the work of Phillips in those last awful 15 minutes. 2 years to the day after the sinking, the Phillips Memorial Cloister was dedicated and opened in Godalming, Surrey. It is the largest of any of the Titanic memorials. Thanks for watching Profiles from the Titanic.